Welcome to F1 Coffee Corner, Full Beans. I'm your host as always, Terry, and I'm here to keep you up to date with all of the unbiased, hard-hitting Formula 1 news. So grab your favourite mug of coffee, sit down, strap in and get yourself comfortable to join in the conversation. Because this is F1 Coffee Corner. This is Full Beans, the must-have podcast for all Formula 1 fans. Welcome back to another episode of F1 Coffee Corner, Full Beans the podcast. I'm your host as always, Terry, and in this week's episode, we're going to be looking at the return of Danny Ricciardo in the Espresso News. We're going to take a look back at Silverstone in the coffee chat, which includes my own personal trip for my first ever Grand Prix along with my dad, which was, well, it was pretty special, pretty epic, and lots to tell on that one. And then finally, in the takeaway, we're going to be looking ahead to the Hungarian Grand Prix next weekend and what we can expect from teams in terms of resurgent teams, what to look out for, and who to watch next week in Hungary. So, without further ado, let's sit down, strap in, and give this week's episode some full beans. Welcome to the Espresso News. Let me get comfy as we look back on what's been a, momentous week if you're a Danny Ricciardo fan. That's right, on Tuesday lunchtime, news started leaking out from the media in the Netherlands that Danny Ricciardo was on his way back to Formula 1 with Alpha Tauri at the expense of Nick de Vries. This story kind of hovered for a couple of hours before we started getting official confirmation. It was one of those ones that it got reported, then it kind of snowballed, and then we were all kind of sat there waiting for this official confirmation from Red Bull that this indeed was happening while Danny was checking in the time on the track at Silverstone as part of the Pirelli tyre test in the RB19. Finally, late afternoon, that's better, early evening, we got the news that Danny Ricciardo was indeed back on the Formula 1 grid on loan from Red Bull at Alpha Tauri for the rest of the season, and that Nick de Vries has been sacked. I've got some views on this one, some quite probably different views to what some people are saying. And these are just based on what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing. We can interpret this situation how we want to, and we're all going to have a different view and a different take on it. But ultimately, the one thing we can all agree on is that having Danny Ricciardo back on the grid can only be good for Formula 1 in terms of the commerciality of Formula 1 and just what he brings to the sport, just his persona, his charisma. Yeah, he's been missed on the grid this year, not only by the fans, but I think also by media outlets. Just Formula 1 itself, just from a market point of view, has struggled with having a personality as good as Danny to portray. Hence why he's been used a lot, even as technically a third driver for Red Bull. So on that note, I must say, it's static to have Danny back on the grid in Formula 1. It's great to have him on. Alpha Tauri, I don't think it's the right move for him, though. This is the reasons why. Now, my theory on what happened on that Tuesday afternoon is slightly different to how it's been portrayed in the media. We're being told, and how this story is being set, is that Danny gets in the RB19, he starts stoking it around Silverstone, puts in some pretty hot laps, close to pole position time that Max was setting on Saturday. And then suddenly, Christian whips out the mobile phone, gives Helmut a ring, says, Danny's on fire. Let's get him in the car. Get rid of Nick de Vries. I don't think that's how it played out, and here's why. Now, I think the decision to replace Nick de Vries was made on Sunday after the British Grand Prix and the performance there. I think he had certain criteria that he had to hit, which included times in the simulator as well as points. Ultimately, it's a bit hard to judge him on points. Yuki's only got 2 ahead of him, so that's a harsh criteria. But I do think that Nick de Vries was in no doubt whatsoever in terms of what he needed to get to stay an Alpha Tauri driver. And if you look at the noise we're hearing coming out, we're hearing that he wasn't setting the times in the simulator, he wasn't hitting the benchmarks, and I think that's key for this conversation. I think that Nick de Vries was fired on Sunday evening through Monday morning, and I think that decision was made then to put Danny in the car. Why do I think this? Because of how the media played out Tuesday. So Danny Ricciardo's in this Pirelli tyre test. We know it's happening. It's been happening for a while. However, the people in the garage at the Pirelli tyre test just doesn't ring true for a normal tyre test. Think back to Mercedes doing the one in Spain. Think back to filming day that Ferrari doing. And you haven't got the sorts of people who are hanging around Silverstone on a Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon. You've got Christian Horner. Now, you'll be saying, wow, Milton Keynes down the road from Silverstone. Yes, it is. But a team principal does not go to a tyre test, mid-season, just after a Grand Prix weekend. It doesn't normally happen, to be honest. They will normally just get the data at a later date. Now, I know Dan is high profile. I know he's got a good relationship with Christian. But I don't believe there is nothing to have made him gone to the track unless what's about to play out has played out. And what I mean by that is the other people who are also there. Naturally, we've got Red Bull's social media team. You'd expect that with someone like Danny in there. They want the footage of Danny in the car, getting out on social media, and rightly so, to be honest. However, Netflix were there filming Drive to Survive. Now, Netflix have no agreement to film testing footage at all. So they would have had to have asked for this specifically. Now, they may well have done this because it's Danny Ricciardo. He's been in this in season 1, and actually he's a very high-profile driver. But I doubt it very much because of the other teams who were there would not have wanted that to happen. So, it wasn't a closed session for Red Bull. There was other teams there. There was Williams there. I believe Haas were also there as well. And also it was chosen to put Danny in on the Tuesday, not the Monday, when Haas had members of the public there on the Monday. So all of this plays into this sort of, premeditated media move, which, by the way, I'm absolutely cool with. This is the world that we live in nowadays. And I think this is being played out for a fantastic episode of Drive to Survive, because now you've got this footage of Danny in the car, testing the Red Bull, finally getting back in the Red Bull, that full circle of where he's come from to being back in that car. Then you've got competitive lap times, which, by the way, you can't check if these lap times are true or not, because Pirelli normally hold on to the data because of the fact it's a tyre test, so teams don't get an advantage in next year's tyres. So we've actually got no way of collaborating this at all in terms of what times he was setting, even though we're told what they are. We don't know if that's true or not. There's no way, there's no official timing sessions, no sector times, anything like that. So we don't know. We've only got people's word for it. We've then also got this footage now of Christian Horner in the garage on the phone, to Helmut Marko saying, look how fast Danny is. Let's get him in the car. Then, I imagine we're going to switch to a scene with probably Helmut Marko back at Milton Keynes, possibly, or in Austria, taking the phone call from Christian, giving Danny his seat. Then we're going to have the footage of Christian telling Danny he's back in the car. It makes for a perfect episode. Maybe it's the cynic in me. Maybe I'm just reading far too much into a situation. But I believe that this isn't a replacement for Checo. And there's another reason for that, which I'll come on to in a minute. I believe that this was played out from a commercial point of view to make Alpha Tauri a lot more commercial for the rest of the season, because ultimately they're now looking for a new title sponsor, a new name to go on that car. What better way to advertise your car than to have Danny Ricciardo as the driver? We've talked about this Red Bull synergy that Helmut Marko has been on about. Well, you've now got one of the most marketable drivers alongside the likes of probably Lewis Hamilton in Formula One in your car. That is going to be massive for the sponsors. That's going to be huge for the sponsors who are going to be queuing up now to get into Alpha Tauri, especially when you've now got a team willing to change their name to go with a title sponsor. It's going to be worth millions for Alpha Tauri. And that's why I believe that this is a commercial deal which gets Danny back in the car, not an attempt to replace Checo. Why don't I think it's an attempt to replace Checo? Because, what I'm hearing is quite simply, we're doing this so that we can get Danny in the car, we can get him up to speed, and then we can then put the pressure on Checo. And if Danny's any good, Checo's out, Danny's in. If that's the case, why haven't we done that? If that was the case, if Danny was as fast, as impressive as this story is making us to believe, and I'm not taking anything away from Danny's driving abilities before people kind of, go down that route at all. I think he deserves to be on the grid, and rightfully so. But I just can't understand, if you've got someone who's so competitive in a car, who's so good, why you would then go and place them in the slowest car on the grid and continue with Checo if you weren't going to continue with Checo anyway. I think the story for Checo is very different. I think it's a much different way of looking at things. I think this is actually to take the pressure off Checo. I think that Red Bull have got no intention to replace Checo before 2024. He's got lots of, we go back to his word commercial value. He's second in the championship as well. Let's not take away from his driving ability. I've not been Checo's biggest fan. But if you're a Red Bull driver with Max, your criteria is second in the championship and for you to win the Constructors' Championship, because Max is going for the Drivers' Championship. At the moment, Checo is ticking out boxes. Okay, his qualifying performance has been pretty shit, but apart from that, he's actually extended his lead after the weekend with the resurgence of McLaren, which fits in to Checo massively, because he will welcome McLaren coming back into play because he takes more points off Fernando and potentially off Lewis. So, he's all for McLaren resurgence, that's for sure. But this is why I can't see it playing out as it did. Checo's got great commercial value still in a lot of places for Red Bull as well. And whilst they're notorious for getting rid of their drivers, they don't want that all the time to be their narrative. Now, they've just completely changed the narrative before next week's Hungarian Grand Prix. You're now going to have not the fact that Checo's missed Q3 so many times, but you've got Danny in the car. Where do you think the media's going? It's going down to Alpha Tauri. It's going down the back of the grid. It's going back there with the cameras on Danny. It's not going to Checo at all. Now, Checo might have a mare, don't get me wrong, and then suddenly he becomes the focus of it. But I think this is all designed to give him some breathing space, because before he had the spectre of Danny sat on the pit wall, headphones on, full Red Bull gear, looming over him as a replacement. Every time they wanted a bit of media footage, cut to the pit wall, there he is. If you're Checo, that's putting pressure on you. By putting him in the slowest car on the grid, that's not putting pressure on you, that's taking pressure off you, because suddenly they can't go to the pit wall anymore. And if he starts outperforming Danny, then nothing gets said because it's expected. I mean, don't get me wrong, if Danny outperforms Checo, we're going to have a whole different ball game. And I'm sure deep down that is Danny's plan. But I don't think it's Red Bull's plan, if that makes sense. But I think Checo is still going to see out his contract till 2024. We're hearing a lot of talk about Lando. We're hearing a lot of talk about even Charles Leclerc with Red Bull as a second driver. They know that the driver's market is going to come into play next year in 2024. Summer 2024 is the key date for a driver's market. Now, I know Lando's under contract till 2025, so that puts a bit of a spanner in the works. But we also know there's going to be a hell of a lot of movement next year. And Red Bull are going to be in the middle of it in terms of the top teams, because Checo's contract runs out at the end of 2024. So I think they're going to let his contract wind down. I don't think they're going to replace him at all. I think they're going to let his contract wind down. He's going to be there next season, because then in summer of 2024, when every card's on the table for most of the top drivers, Red Bull are in there with a number 2 seat ready to go. Danny may well play his way into that conversation with his performance, but it's going to be very hard to bring that performance from the worst performing car on the grid. Alpha Tauri made upgrades and went backwards in terms of how they are. I don't see this working out for Danny. I don't see what he can prove by it, because if he gets outperformed by Yuki, he's done. He's in trouble. If Yuki suddenly starts getting points and Danny still hovers around where Nick DeVries did, what's going to happen then? I mean, that's a massive gamble for Danny. And I know people are saying, it's to try him out, it's to get him back on the grid. He's doing this because he wants a Red Bull seat. I've got no doubt that Danny wants a Red Bull seat. Don't get me wrong. I think he's always wanted that seat back in terms of what's happened at McLaren. I'm just not sure that Red Bull are on the same page in terms of giving him that seat back, is my personal opinion. Like I say, it is my personal opinion. It's, I'm sure others have got a different take on it. I just think that it's great for Danny to be back. I think it's done for very commercial reasons, but also to help him. Ultimately, he's on a very low wage for Alpha Tauri. Well, Red Bull, because he's on loan from them, because we know that McLaren are topping up his wage for whatever Red Bull pay. So, in terms of the rules, how it works, because there was no clause in Danny's contract, he had to be fired by McLaren. So they've had to pay him his final settlement for his last year of his contract. Reportedly worth around, I think it's about $12 million. Could be as high as 18, we hear. But ultimately, around the sort of $12 million mark seems to be a good conservative figure that's going around. Now, at the moment, McLaren pay that minus whatever Red Bull pay him to be now an Alpha Tauri driver. So they're not going to be paying a lot of money, Red Bull, because they don't want to pay out. So ultimately, Danny don't care, because he's still getting his $12 million or whatever it is. He doesn't care where it comes from. Now, if you're Christian Horner, you're making Zach Brown pay for that. So ultimately, you're going to give Danny a $1 million year contract. For argument's sake, it'll probably be more. But this is kind of the theory behind it. And then the other 11 million has to come from McLaren under the Concord agreement. So therefore, this is great for Red Bull. They put Danny in an Alpha Tauri, pay him about £1 million. Zach Brown then has to get his checkbook out to pay the other 11 million quid, because that's the deal for the rest of this season. And they've got someone as commercial value as that, then make that back in marketing alone within like a few weeks in terms of £1 million. So it's a win-win situation from Red Bull. Again, amazingly clever strategy from Red Bull. Just brilliant in how they've done things. Just amazing how they've gone about these things. This is an Alpha Tauri move, which I think Danny's in the right frame of mind to get back in the car. I think he wants a Red Bull seat and he wants to prove himself. I'm still struggling with how you can do that in the worst performing car on the grid. But then he's probably seen how lots of Alex Albon's done there at Williams. how George Russell did at Williams before as well. So he's probably seeing, if I can get some good results out of that, then actually I'm going to put my name into the frame. And if it's not Red Bull for 2024, there's a hell of a lot of seats also available for 2024 to get into. So, yeah, that's my take on Danny Ricciardo returning to the grid. Like I say, it might not be a popular take. My personal view, as I've said many times throughout this segment of the podcast, I'm personally delighted to see him back on the grid. From a personality, from a commerciality, just having him back on the grid, he deserves to be on the grid, in my opinion. I do feel really hard for Nick de Vries. 10 races is not enough. If you think about it, he's only 2 points behind Yuki, which is nothing. If he got a good result in the next couple of races, he would actually be ahead of Yuki. In terms of Liam Lawson, I've heard that bandied about a bit. I think the reason why Liam Lawson hasn't been put in the Alpha Tauri is to protect him as well. So I think this is the other problem they had. They didn't want to put Liam Lawson in an Alpha Tauri that was at the back of the grid and completely destroy his confidence, completely destroy his, his good work that he's doing in Super Formula over in Japan. All of this stuff that he's doing, they wanted him to come into a better car. Now, Danny will help develop that car quite naturally because he's been around the sport a long time. He's been around Red Bull for the past few months. He will naturally bring with him that knowledge to help develop the car, which, Nick potentially didn't have. And I think they're getting it ready for next season's lineup. What does next season's lineup look like for Red Bull and Alpha Tauri? I still think we've got Max and Checo in the Red Bull, and I think we're going to have Liam Lawson and Yuki in the Alpha Tauri, and I think Danny is going to be looking for a drive somewhere else, be my opinion, or even we might even see Danny and Liam Lawson and Yuki being moved aside. We know Honda's pulling out. Even though Yuki's a good driver, his tie-up was very much to do with Honda engines. We know that Honda's obviously going to Aston Martin, so that puts Yuki in a bit of danger, even though he's part of the Red Bull family. So I don't think that Yuki is going to have shown enough this season to promote it up to Red Bull. Will I think that they choose Danny over Yuki? I honestly don't know. I think that might be a call they're going to make at the end of this season. But that is my expressive news and my take on Daniel Ricciardo returning to the grid for Alpha Tauri on loan from Red Bull for the rest of the season. Let me know what you think about this one. Let me know if actually you think I'm right or whether or not you just think actually Terry's just talking a load of crap and you're just making this up as you go along. So, Silverstone. I mean, where did we start? I mean, Silverstone was my first ever Grand Prix live. It was the first time my dad's experienced it as well, so I went with my dad. And I must admit, we had an absolutely amazing time. But don't you miss so much when you're at a Grand Prix? I had to watch the highlight show to find out what happened in the race. How ridiculous is that? But yeah, what a Grand Prix, great result for McLaren getting in amongst it. I think Mercedes be happy to hang on to what they did in the end. Disappointing for Aston Martin. Disappointment completely for Alpine in terms of how they expected to perform their season so far. Otmar's going to have to be looking over his shoulder. Real big disappointment for Ferrari. 9th and 10th is not what you expect a Ferrari to be at Silverstone. There's no way they're going to be happy with that. Clearly having problems with the tyres still. Clearly having issues with strategy. And it looks like it's a bit of trouble brewing between Carlos and Charles as well. So really intrigued to see where that one goes and how that one plays out, especially with both their contracts up next year as well. A lot of talk about Carlos potentially going to Audi for 2025. A lot of talk about Charles even being fancied by Aston Martin and Mercedes even is one whisper that's going around. No substance, of course. We're playing the Chinese whispers game, so you got to get a dose of salt out when you're hearing some of these ones, that's for sure. But ultimately, a lot of teams didn't fare well. Williams, great performance from Alex Albon P8 and Logan Sargent in P11. Sorry, I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, hence the momentary pause while I'm remembering all these things. But yeah, great drive from Williams, from Alex Albon particularly. I think Logan Sargent, best result of the season for him so far. He's performed well, upgraded cars doing well. Lando and Oscar, we can't go past this segment without talking about those two. Fantastic drive from both of them, to be honest. Lando was just on it all weekend. Oscar dragging that McLaren. Bear in mind, he didn't have the same car as Lando. Lando had more upgrades again. And yet Oscar still managed to, get as close as he did to Lewis even pipping him. Great start from both of the McLaren drivers. Max, even though Lando took lead, I don't think he looked in any trouble, if I'm honest. Driving just supremely in that RB19. He is just a driver at the top of his game, ready to be crowned a triple champion. There is no doubt in my mind. He's just driving just imperiously, just around the track, no mistakes, cool, calm, collected. You keep hearing these sort of radio messages, and people go, "Oh, look, Max is struggling with this." It's just the way Max is in a car. I think he comes across sometimes as being either agitated or being sort of uptight. I just think that's how he is. He just wants to win everything going. He wants to just dominate. Let's be honest about it. You just see him in the car, and that's what he wants to do. And to be fair, he is at the moment. We are. I keep saying it. We're in the Max era now. There was talk of, was it the passing of the torch between Lewis and Lando? I'm not sure we're there yet. I expect Lewis to just be a bit more competitive still for another couple of years yet, but we are starting to see that moment where maybe Lando, even ahead of George, is going to become the British fans' favourite, which is going to be interesting. That's for sure. Alfa Romeo going down the grid look non-existent. They look like they've given up already and checked out. Alpha Tauri, we said, disaster. Haas just going backwards. So it was an interesting race in terms of performance. We expected more from Aston Martin, and we haven't got it. I still feel that there's a question mark over Lance Stroll's future with Aston Martin if they want to be considered title challengers. I think that he's cost them too many points this season, and I think that if Lawrence wants to turn them into potentially winning something like the Constructors' Championship as well as the Drivers' Championship, he's going to have to do some soul searching over whether or not having Lance as the second driver at Aston Martin is the way forward for him to do so. There's a lot of pressure, I think, on him now. I think he could have potentially cost them their place in the championship, which is bad if you're bad for morale. If you're one of the members of the team, you could easily point the finger that way. Not saying they will do, but it would be certainly an area to be looking at in terms of he could have maximised a lot more points from what was clearly a more dominant car at the start of the season. That's all I'm going to say on the matter for that one. But ultimately, I do want to see Lance come good because I think that he is still a good driver, despite the sort of public opinion he's only in it because he's Lance's son. But I think if you want to make that step from good to great, they're going to have to do something about it. And I think that having Fernando is great, but he needs somebody else alongside him, getting points regularly and contributing to the team if you're going to increase the team standings. It's just my take on it. But let's just talk about Silverstone as an experience. Let's talk about Silverstone as a Grand Prix, because I can now talk about that as a Grand Prix attendee. Is that a word? Grand Prix attendee? I'm sure it's a word. So yeah, I did Silverstone with my dad for the first time for both of us. My dad's been a motorsport fan for longer than I've been alive. Never been able to get to the Formula One. Taking it off his bucket list was pretty epic. And we had some surprises for him. We kind of went all out, to the point where I'm not quite sure how I'm going to replicate it at the next Grand Prix we go to, because I kind of, done some things, got some things organised, which I'm not sure how on earth I'm ever going to do that again. But yeah, so we went for the launch party on the Thursday. Launch party was very much a festival feel, very little on-track action. The only on-track action we actually saw was the F1 show being filmed, which was quite good itself. But in terms of, an event, very much geared towards the concert in the evening, Calvin Harris launching it. We use it as a great opportunity to have a look around. So we use it to have a look around at the fan zone, all of the stalls. Didn't buy any merch from there. Don't buy any merch from the track because of the price for it. It was a ridiculous price. 180 quid we saw for a hoodie, 50 quid for a cap. However, big shout out to the Aston Martin van driver who gave me a cap for nothing because I was wearing my Aston Martin shirt and my Aston Martin gilet and wanted me to complete the set. Wound down the window, chucked me a cap, worth 50 quid. Absolutely epic, man. I gifted it on to somebody else because I've already got one at home. So yeah, it was a pretty cool thing to do from that point of view. And then we just kind of had a look around, had something to eat, just chilled out. We didn't stop at Silverstone because a couple of things. One, I wanted to come back out and show with the kids. Their needs are really high, being disabled, and I didn't feel comfortable being down there for such a long amount of time. So I wanted to do that. I also wanted to do school runs as well, which I managed to do before we went to Silverstone. And also, camping is not my bag. It's just not my cup of tea. Nothing against people who camp, by the way. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. It just doesn't appeal to me, and it certainly didn't appeal to put my dad in that situation at his age where he's not a camper at all. He wouldn't be a happy camper, as the phrase would go. He doesn't do camping, so there's no way else going to subject him to that. So Silverstone for us is only about an hour away, getting on for about an hour and 40 minutes with traffic, to be honest, with the Silverstone traffic, which I must say was really well organised, apart from race day coming out, which I'll come on to when we get there. But in terms of actually getting out the track, we did it with ease. We went quite I say quite early. We went down at an average time on the Thursday. We did school run and everything first. Left my place, got down there for about 10 o'clock. Has a short queue to get in, then got in, so that was pretty cool. Parking was easy to find, no problems at all with that. We did the Silverstone prepay parking, and we did that on the Thursday. Friday we didn't go down actually, so we took Friday off more as a recovery day, and predominantly also because it was my daughter's last day of term and she had an assembly which I wanted to go to, so it kind of made a lot of sense to give us a day off, especially while we were driving down as well, and we were only kind of missing free practice, so we went with that. But we did like the fan zone in the bits on the Thursday, got all the photos of that, had a good walk around, had to go on a couple of competitions, pit stop challenge, all those things, so we did that. Wandered around in the track but couldn't really work out what we got for our ticket. We did have Mahika Thursday night VIP tickets. It kind of felt like a waste of money. I think you could have got in there quite easily without them and save yourself a lot of money. So what I would say is, if you're going to go Mahika VIP, don't do it on opening night. Wait till it's a race night or something where you'll get real value from it. Would be my sort of take on that one. But in terms of going in there itself, it was really good. Great service in there, spacious. VIP area was really, really good, cordoned off. You got to sit there, you had toilets right by you. We had a bar you could just walk up and get served. So, yeah, it was pretty epic on that front, even though I wasn't drinking because I was driving. 0.0% Heineken. I've never drunk so much alcohol-free lager in my life as I did all weekend. But, yeah, then we come on to Saturday. So, Saturday qualifying, we actually booked hospitality tickets. Before everyone thinks we won the lottery, we didn't. It cost us about £500 a ticket is around the price, maybe a little bit more. So with that though, we got all of our food and drink included. We got a boxing heritage part of the track, so we were on the ground floor right by where the F2, F3 pit lane was and where Brad Pitt's cars were coming in at the pits as well. And with that, you got a box which housed about 20 people. You got food and drink all day, and you also got a little terrace area where you could sit out there and watch the cars go past as well, right on the inner track, right on the corner, down by Woodcott, I think it was, if I remember rightly, we were down by. So, yeah, it was really, really good to watch that. Really great in there all day. So, yeah, you got a programme with it. You got the Silverstone radio included in it. You got your parking included in it, which was a lot closer to the track because it was in hospitality. So it was like you parked up and you were 10 minutes down through the tunnel into in a track and you were there. So that was quite cool. We had breakfast when we got there. They were buffet food, so you could help yourself. Drinks, just help yourself. Well, you didn't help yourself. There was some great people who were hosting us, who got food, drinks ready and stuff like that, who were amazing. Big shout out to the Silverstone hospitality crew, who did a great job of keeping my dad in beer. And yeah, so you just asked them for a drink, they gave you a drink. Then at lunchtime, you had like an hour or so window when lunch was up as well. Then afternoon tea as well, all the way up until 6 o'clock when hospitality called last orders, and then 6:30 it finished. We didn't stop for the evening. We decided to beat the traffic and get home because my dad's not a big music lover, and to be honest, he drank far too much in hospitality to be wandering around Silverstone. So we thought the best thing to do was get him in the car, ready for race day itself. Then we come on to Sunday race day. And this is where we had a little bit of a surprise. Now, I got to start being careful what I talk about, because ultimately, when you think about it now, my dad now follows my TikTok and also he follows my podcast. So anything I say, he can see, which up until now I've been able to get away with. But now he actually follows me. I can't do this anymore. So I've got to be careful what I say. But we did have something planned for him for quite a while, and that was a Paddock tour. Yeah. I say plan for him, it was also planned for me because that's speciality. I got to go as well, which was amazing. But yeah, so we did a Paddock tour. Now we had a time we had to be there by, and we had to go and get these wristbands ready to get on the minibus basically. So it kind of gave the game away when we got these big wristbands which said Paddock tour on it. So I had to come clean then. We had a 1 o'clock slot, so because we were over in, I can't remember where we were on the track. I want to say Stowe C, if I remember rightly, we were. We were all the way down there, which was about 30 minutes away from where we had to get the bus from inner track. So what we did then was we hung around in the inner track area, had coffee, had something to eat, watched the cars coming down by there because you could on the straight there, and also managed to get a hold of some food and drink because actually there was a lot less queues. We were right by the bus stop. No way my dad was missing that bus. They told him to get there for like 22, and to be fair, he was there by 10:30. But yeah, we then took the bus all the way into the inner paddock where we were given the VIP passes to scan in, and then let loose in the paddock for 30 minutes. And just, wow, what an experience. And we got in there, like I say, 1 o'clock, so they were just finishing driver's parade as we were halfway in there. Met Crofty, Carlos Sainz, Oscar Piastri, David Coulthard, you know, a couple of others as well. My dad was on Channel 4 running after Lando Norris. Like you know, I've never seen him move. And yeah, just a buzz of the paddock was just something else, you know, seeing all the motorhomes, seeing all the deals going on, all the people talking, huddled in corners, you know, nice in-depth chat on the steps of the FIA between Ferrari, Mercedes and an FIA representative who were very keen to know that they were talking, but not very keen for anyone to hear what they were talking about, which is quite interesting from that point of view. And yeah, we got to see all the TV presenters, got to see the Sky pads where that's filmed, got to see the stage where they talk after for Sky as well. Not as spaced out as it looks on telly, to be honest. They're actually next to each other. The media pen, obviously saw that one. Saw a friend who now works for Pirelli, so big shout out to Naz, if she happens to be catching the podcast. She used to work with me years ago, and ironically is now working for Pirelli in the tyre section in the paddock. So that was a complete shock to get a shout out and be recognised going down the paddock by her. But yeah, great to see her again. Great to see that she's doing so well as well. And you know, yeah, Pirelli in the paddock, fair play to her. And yeah, so we had a wander around. Then we were kind of booted out. Then, to be perfectly honest, we were only given half an hour in there. We didn't get to see Lewis. He snuck in the back way off the driver's thing. Max was the same. He was literally, you know, pegging it through. A couple of the kids got the photo with him who were with us on tour as well, which is great. But in terms of that, didn't see George at all. Saw Alonso and we saw Lance in the motorhomes. You can see there, James Vowles we come across was sat in the motorhome drinking coffee, getting ready for the race as well. So Esteban Ocon, who I saw. So yeah, it's quite a few there. And it was just great to be in the paddock and just be part of it. And you could just feel the buzz. And it is quite draining. It just hits you as you walk in. It's just like, woof, with all these people, all this information. We then finished that and went over to our seat, which was about sort of 20-minute walk. So let's cut through and then track it over the bridge that way. So we did that. And then we watched the race, which was fantastic to see where we were sat. Great to be in the grandstand watching it. Weather turned out all right on the day as well, which is always good. And then we got out, which we had a delay getting out because of an accident on the road, which is just one of the things you can't cater for. Made us sit there for a couple of hours without moving, which was a bit annoying. But do you know what? When you find out someone's been injured and that's why you've been sat there, you kind of go, do you know what? At least we managed to get home safely, because unfortunately someone didn't from that incident today. So at the end of the day, all in all, really good organisation by Silverstone. We had an absolute blast. Massive shout out to Silverstone for helping organise my dad's and myself a paddock tour. Really appreciate that. More than they know. It was great to see his reaction. Great to see his face on there. And roll on next one, because he's got the race bug now. He's on about going to Monaco and everything. So who knows where my dad's adventures are going to take us. But, you know, I'm all for it, especially if he's paying. But yeah, that was our review of Silverstone. Great atmosphere. We didn't see any trouble from there. Not a fan of the booing that the Matt's got at all. I think we should just appreciate the fact he's driving really well. I'm not a lover of the fact he was getting booed quite a bit. I think it's a bit petty, if I'm honest, from a personal point of view. We should, applaud the drivers for how well they're doing. It puts a dampener on things. It doesn't look good as well. So, that's my plea to it. Certainly didn't like the fact people were trying to get the signage off the track as well. I mean, how stupid do people get doing that? You're not going to get it out of the track. Security was stopping you. All you've done is rip up a sign for nothing. But then police at the race went without a hitch with the protesters that we were being warned about. So actually, all in all, a pretty good race, really well organised. Definitely can't wait to do the next one. Definitely won't be waiting until next year till I'm back at Silverstone, let's put it that way, because there's some things coming up, that's for sure. And that is your coffee chat. I hope you've enjoyed that debrief on Silverstone and what happened, and my personal experience from mine and my dad's first ever Grand Prix. And that brings us nicely into the takeaway, where we're going to have a look at Hungary. So, Hungarian Grand Prix next week. All eyes on Danny Ricciardo, but all eyes are going to be on McLaren, Aston Martin. And has Aston Martin got what it takes to get back up there? And has McLaren got what it takes to stay up there? This is a big question that's going to be asked. We know that Mercedes went quite well there before. We know that Ferrari tend to go quite well in Hungary. I'm fully expecting Max to win. in terms of the top of the podium. I'm also expecting that we might just see Checo with a point to prove, and that maybe he's going to get a bit closer to the podiums, if not on there, backing Max up. I don't think he'll win. I think it's Max's to win. But I'm really intrigued to see how this battle between McLaren, Aston Martin, Mercedes plays out. I think Alpine are going to want to join it, but I don't think they're there yet. I think Williams, with their upgrades, might be a surprise points in there again. I don't think we're going to get the fairy tale of Danny Rick in the points, but I could be wrong. Hope I'm wrong. I'd like to see him do it. But I just think that for me, it's that mix of, we're rumouring that Aston Martin are going to bring upgrades to it. It's one of their last kind of pushes before the majority of the teams switch to next year's development. Now, there won't be a lot of teams now developing this car, unless, of course, there's a benefit for next year. We know the regulations are the same. So actually, if there's some tweaks and stuff teams can make for this year's car, they will do so. But I think a lot of the focus now is on the 2024 cars for a lot of the top teams, especially. And it's probably been even longer on the bottom teams who haven't got the budget. They've already probably switched their development because they haven't got the financial backing to go into developing two cars almost simultaneously like most of the teams have. But I'm fully expecting a bounce back from Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso. I don't know whether McLaren's got enough to hold on to it. They made 11 upgrade changes. So, it's a big jump. I think James Allison was saying he hasn't seen a jump like this, mid-season for a long time. But you got to remember, this is the jump they wanted to make at the beginning of the season that they got so horribly wrong. So, is this a big jump or is this a delayed jump? And that's my question. Were they on course to have made the same jump as Aston Martin if they got the summer right? But they made that mistake with their floor, which sent them down a rabbit hole and, sent them down a road they couldn't get back from quick enough because of the cost cap. So, now, in terms of the cost cap, we might as well touch on the cost cap before I wrap up the episode. So there is no information out about the cost cap expenditure for last season at all. The FIA is saying that they're hoping to resolve it a lot quicker than what they did last year. It was October last year, wasn't it? We got the results. So they're hoping it's going to be a lot quicker. They have doubled the team. I've mentioned that on here before in terms of the people investigating, but they are doing a lot of investigation into outside influences. Now, what I mean by that is where you've got teams doing like road cars, hypercar projects like AMG One, the Ferrari hypercar, Aston Martin have been doing some as well. We know Red Bull have also done some in the past. So they've got Red Bull Advanced Technologies. So this is where they're doing work outside of the Formula One remit. And what the cost cap team are concerned by is that the top teams are using this to charge hours out as well as charge people out, and that eventually what they're going to do is that technology is going to come back but at a much reduced price and therefore be a cost cap loophole. But it's very hard to evidence, very hard to prove that it's happening. So what they're doing now is they're doing like questionnaires with people. They're doing also sitting down and interviewing people as well. So they talk about people whose role isn't Formula One to find out exactly what they do, where they've been working, what hours they've been doing, to find out if there is anything in there to investigate further. So I do think it's going to take a long time to get the cost cap data. I'm hoping it's not as long as it was last year, because it did seem to drag, and hopefully it will be very clean and precise in terms of what's going on. So I'm hoping that we just get the certificates land and then it's done. But if you're hearing anything about over expenditure or anything like that, it's pure rubbish. The things to look out for, not talk about Aston Martin's development. What you've got to bear in mind is that the factory costs are outside of the cost cap. So they've actually they probably save money on their factory costs by building a new factory. And that sounds really random. And people are probably sat there going, what the hell are you on about? What you've got to remember is, if they were, normally they would have had to spend money on upgrading their facilities, because the factory is outside of the cost cap, because it was pre-arranged before the cost cap came into place but delayed due to COVID. That money that they would have potentially spent on renovating their factory, they've actually saved, and it doesn't come out the cost cap anymore. So in a roundabout way, building a new factory is probably cheaper for them. So we know that they've got that building going on. They're now on building 2, so they've just knocked down the old Jordan factory, and they're fully moved into their brand new building 1. So building 2 is around staff facilities, so gym, studios in there, canteen, simulators, and logistical space for flyaway races especially. So big area for that. And also they're doing wind tunnel work, but they finally knocked down the old Jordan factory this week and started work on building 2. But Aston Martin are now fully in their new Silverstone headquarters, which they opened up to some members of the public for the first time last week before Silverstone. And looking at the pictures, it looks absolutely amazing, to be honest. So yeah, if you're watching Aston Martin, certainly wouldn't want to tour that one if there's one going. And that's pretty much it for this week. So, like I say, Hungary next week, I'm fully expecting Red Bull to continue, especially Max. I'm expecting a Checo resurgent, Mercedes to be strong, but also Aston Martin to be back in the game. And don't count out the Ferraris and the McLarens. So we could be in for an absolute epic of a racing weekend next weekend. Then, of course, we then go on to Spa. In terms of Spa, we did have the wet weather testing going on at Silverstone this week. We're not hearing any data from that or what's been said about that. So for those of you who don't know, at Silverstone this week on Wednesday, Mercedes run with these new rear wheel guards, like mud guards on the back to direct the flow away from the driver behind. McLaren were driving as normally without them, and the idea is you can see the effects that it had on spray, driver visibility, and they used the Wellington Straight at Silverstone, which they artificially soaked to recreate wet weather. So hopefully there's some good positive safety news to come out from that. A lot of doubts whether or not it will make a difference, but if it does make a difference to safety, then it should definitely be rushed through and definitely be put on the cars and in the categories lower down as well to help save some lives. So fingers crossed that one went okay. And I think that's pretty much all I've got for you on this week's episode. What I will say is a couple of things from me is if you do get the opportunity to follow, subscribe, like, whatever it is you can do on whatever platform you're watching on, I'd really appreciate it. Apparently, these ratings and rankings don't do nothing without people leaving reviews and following and subscribing. So if you could do that for me, I would really appreciate that. And that's pretty much all it is for this week. So with that in mind, I bid you farewell. Tune in next week, Hungarian Grand Prix. We'll do a debrief after that one. Speak to you all soon.